Okay. Thank you, Rick and Stu. Actually, thank you, Rick and Stu. I'm so sorry. My name is Max Ringelheim. I'm the founder of Vonvo.com. Thank you both for joining me here today to discuss Israel and Palestine on Saturday, December 29th. I just need to go over two quick important things with you. The first is I just want to inform you that this video is being recorded, and once the discussion is over, we'll be uploading the video to the internet and posting it to our Vonvo YouTube channel. Rick, is that okay with you? Do you give us permission to do that?
Yes, that's fine.
And Sue, do you give us permission to do that? Yes, Sue? Okay, there you go. Thank you. And now just the second important rule. I just want to go over a few quick rules and regulations. On Vonvo, we're just not trying to have any personal attacks occur, no insults or racist remarks, no belittling, and we just want to keep the conversation civil and valuable. Are you both okay with that?
No problem here.
Great. Okay. So knowing that, let's get right into the discussion and what we're all here today to discuss, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Just to ease our way into it, Rick, would you mind first, would you mind just each giving the viewers who watch this video a quick background of yourself? Rick, you could start.
Well, I'm a physician. I served in the military, and I worked for the VA. I was a psychiatrist for the VA. Currently, I'm involved in national and international politics. I have a couple of talk shows, and I blog frequently and interact in other ways with various individuals and groups around the world who are working for peace and social justice.
Great. And Sue, how about you?
What's happening? During witness, just returning from Bethlehem. Lisa. Well, anyway, we do it.
Okay, Sue, just the one thing I was going to say is, could you just like hold the microphone right in front of your mouth, because I think when it goes back and forth, that's where it goes in and out. Can you like put it right next to your mouth?
Okay, is that working better?
Yeah, when you hold it, it works much better.
But maybe we could find that.
That's okay. All right, thank you so much. Rick, why don't we start with you again, easing our way into it. What exactly got you so passionate about this particular subject?
Well, it's just part of the larger problem. We have a situation where the U.S. government is controlled by corporations, people who got rich through corporations, and who have their own agenda. And we have the largest military in the world, and so we really unopposed. There's an alliance between the U.S., the United Kingdom, other NATO countries, and Israel to sort of set things up so that they will achieve increasing dominance, these different nations, and it'll make it very difficult for other countries to have a role in what they call the New World Order, unless they're given permission. It's a bit like a mafia setup. I think that's dangerous for everybody, and Israel's just one piece of it. But if you want to illustrate the example of injustice of having one group rule over another group, I think Israel-Palestine is a perfect example.
Great. And Sue, would you mind just sharing how you became so passionate about this subject?
Oh Okay, well, it started in 2008. Started doing basically as an photographer, volunteer, but I could already, especially children. So I started photographing.
Why is it going in and out?
Um,
Rick, is Sue going in and out for you as well?
Very much so. I can make out almost nothing.
Yeah, it's like it's going in and out, Sue, for some reason.
Microphone. You want to try it without the microphone?
Well, that's work. Now it's working right now, but
It was working without me touching it.
yeah,
Oh, this is terrible. I'm sorry.
that's okay. No, not a problem. Finish what you were saying.
Okay, well, anyway, I got interested in human rights work and photographing for peace, and in general by helping, by supporting different peace groups all over. I started with photographing the children there. Horrible. And then I decided to take my mission to the Middle East, to Kuwait. That was in 2008. Got involved with things happening there. That was the year of Operation Cast-Lead. And as I was working on a piece in the Middle East, and Operation Cast-Lead was started in December of 2008. I saw for the first time what was happening and realized for the first time how much of the facts on the ground were hidden from Americans or from us in the United States. There was a much different kind of reporting going on there in Kuwait and in the Middle East that sparked my attention on my own global peace effort at the time, and I had colleagues that were in Gaza at the time and I was with them every night. Operation Cast-Lead. So it was pretty much like I was there. So I decided that it's a conflict that warrants our attention, especially as Americans, that you're funding this. They're funding the abuse of killing children.
Okay.
Something I think every American should check out.
Great. So the first subject that I want to try and talk about a few different subjects today on Vonvo, and keep the conversation organized. The first one that I wanted to discuss with each of you and hear your opinions on would be the idea behind Israel being labeled as an apartheid state. Rick, would you like to quickly go over whether or not you agree with that statement and why? Or disagree?
Sure. Actually, I just did a show on this on SFPI Radio this morning, and I had a discussion with a former member of AIPAC who has a brother who lives in Israel and his family lives there, and he has no difficulty with the idea that Israel is an apartheid society. I mean, he has no difficulty admitting that. He has a big problem with the fact that it's true. But they have at least 25 laws that discriminate officially between Jewish Israelis and between Palestinian Israelis. When you define one group of citizens differently than another, that's an apartheid state. It's not a democracy.
Right. Sue, what's your opinion on that labeling of Israel as an apartheid state?
So I think that it's an absolute accurate label. Again, firsthand, just my recent visit in Bethlehem, witnessed Bethlehem. One example, there's the tourists coming, busloads of tourists coming from Jerusalem, and all of those people were instructed not to do business in Bethlehem with the local Palestinians. they would tour the Church of Nativity, hop back on their bus, and go somewhere else to buy that. I mean, rude and racist, definitely a sign of apartheid. And everybody that comes in has to go through that checkpoint. The Palestinians, they can't go into the
Great. And so, Rick, you mentioned there was about 25 different laws that you were speaking about earlier today on your show.
Well, that's the number he gave. I haven't counted them up lately. Last time I looked was about a year ago, and I found a source that listed 18 different laws. But it's getting worse over time.
Can you give us some insight into what some of those laws are about? What they are?
Not so much specifically. I would refer people to ifamericans.knew.org. They have a lot of detailed information on that particular topic. I can talk about some of the discriminatory policies, though. As far as breaking it down to what laws there are, it's hard to say because the Israeli government disregards its own laws quite often, and the courts do not enforce their laws. So there are lots of examples of discrimination that go on, such as the announced plan to take out, I believe it was 30 Bedouin villages in Israel over the next year or two that predate the existence of the State of Israel for no other reason than that they're inhabited by Arabs. And that is the problem with trying to have a Jewish state. The only way to maintain a majority Jewish population, and right now, if you look at the West Bank and Israel proper as a whole, the population is about evenly split. So the only way to maintain a Jewish majority is to continue to drive non-Jews out. And so they have a deliberate policy of driving out Muslims in particular and Christians who are caught in the crossfire and increasingly victimized by fundamentalist and racist Jews are also leaving. It's not just Muslim and Jewish. The Christians are suffering in the crossfire. There's all kinds of vandalism in Christian churches now. There's been a mass exodus for years of Christians trying to get out of the line of fire. And primarily, since Israel is in the power position, they are the ones, I would say, have the greatest responsibility for this exodus of Christians and certainly of the Muslims who are leaving Israel.
Sue, do you want to give us some insight into any of these particular laws you know about that might be different and discriminatory?
Well, the laws, I'm not sure of the action. You see that Palestinians drive on the side. They're separated even by the tags on the one. That's why the boys who have a white tag.
Sue, can you speak back into the microphone?
Access. Access to the country. We don't. Palestinians don't have it. Not anywhere. And this economic stranglehold is happening all over. Affects everybody. Like the Palestinian. Everybody, whether you're a Christian, Muslim, or Jew, it doesn't matter. If you live in Bethlehem,
Great. And Sue, if you want, do you want to just try without the microphone quickly to see if that works better? Just to give it a quick try?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You want to speak again quickly?
Go ahead. You can hear me though, right?
Yeah, that actually I think is better.
Okay, so let's try it like this for a while.
All right, great. So next question I'm going to throw out there, though, for each of you to talk about would be, the idea behind Israel saying they have the right to defend itself. Do you believe there's any justification on their part for some of the actions which they take, such as having checkpoints and building this wall around the border? Do you think that there's any justification for defense in terms of the actions they commit?
Are you asking me?
Sue, you can take this one first. Sure.
Well, I think it's hard to justify self-defense when you're an invading nation. But the Palestinians that live there, they've lived there for some. They haven't just moved into the territory. They've been to me, it's very difficult to justify self-defense when you're the occupying nation. No, it's not justifiable. It's not justifiable the genocide that's occurred since 1948. Nothing justifies to me one country giving another country a third country. I mean, I can't imagine how Americans would respond to that if we decided through the UN or any other body to offer the United States to someone. That we would fight to defend our own country too. So it's really difficult for me to say.
Rick, do you want to take the same question?
Yeah, I guess I generally agree with Sue. I mean, I have to admit, violence in any form I find unacceptable, and I think that violence coming from Gaza is as objectionable as violence coming from Israel. But as Sue points out, you can go back in history to any point you want and say, oh, Israel did this first, or Hamas did that, or some other Palestinian organization did that first. It all depends on where you start. But the fact of the matter is, Israel, even if you grant that Israel was legitimately established, and not everybody does, they've still been encroaching on Palestinian land ever since the UN mandate, and they've never lived up to any of their promises to work toward a two-state solution. So yes, they're an occupying power. Whether you want to include Israel as being under occupation or not, they're still an occupying power. And as Sue says, there is no country in the world where people would not fight for freedom. It's basic human nature. No one is going to put up with being occupied. Israel has the big guns. Israel has people imprisoned in what would be an open-air prison, except most prisoners have more rights than Gazans. So I've been told I shouldn't use the term open-air prison because most prisons aren't that brutal. There's just no comparison. People that try to make an equivalence between the two sides are not looking at the problem objectively. There is no equivalence between violence coming from an oppressed people in an occupied territory and people who hammer them disproportionately in response to anything they provoke. I think a good analogy is George Zimmerman. Was he acting in self-defense when he shot somebody that he was pursuing and harassing? I think most Americans would say no. I don't know how any honest American can look at this situation and not see the parallel between Israel and Gaza.
So my next question I would ask is, you hear on the pro-Palestinian end, pro-Israeli side, that over the 60 some odd years that the country has been around, that they've given up lands in the past, and they've given up lands to try and in exchange for peace. And you look at, within the past 10 years, they took out all of their citizens who were living in Gaza. What else would you want to see in terms of trying to foster peace? If on the pro-Israeli end, what else do you want to see them be doing?
Well, in the first place, that wasn't their land to give. They shouldn't have been in Gaza in the first place. They were occupying Gaza. And the only reason that they did that was to be able to make the claim that they were making concessions, when in fact, when the settlers left, actually under force of arms, they burned all the buildings because they didn't want to leave anything. The settlers would just assume there weren't any Palestinians at all, and that's why they're willing to actually go and settle in those territories, just like white settlers in the United States went into Indian territories and just took them by force. They were forced by the government to back that down. What the idea is to claim that there's still a possibility of a two-state solution, because look, there's always going to be a Gaza, and there's always going to be some scrap of the West Bank left. But the fact of the matter is, the West Bank is Syrian territory. It was seized at a time of war, and it's been illegally occupied ever since. It is illegal under international law to occupy or to displace a civilian population from a territory that's been seized in a time of war. The settlements are flatly illegal, and even the Israeli law says that. But the government and the courts do not acknowledge that in most cases.
Right. Sue, did you have anything to add on top of that?
Well, you asked that as part of a larger question of what needs to be done, and I think what needs to be done is that people have to start thinking about people on both sides as human beings. Both sides are capable of violence. Israelis obviously are capable of much greater violence because they have the power. Were the situation reversed, perhaps it would be the opposite situation. But if we really want peace, we need to think of them as people first, whether they be Palestinians or Israelis. And only when Americans look at that situation will they see it for what it is. It's, blindly defending Israeli government, regardless of what they do, is the main reason that the problem continues. That allows Israeli people to, in their fear of being attacked, just like Americans after 9/11, in their fear of being attacked, put up with absolutely atrocious behavior on behalf of their government and military. We shouldn't stand for it in the United States when it comes to our military. Israelis should not do that when it comes to their military. They are frightened out of their wits, the ones that care. A lot of people, like here in America, just don't ever think about these things, even though they're right there potentially on the firing line. If they're really afraid, though, then I sympathize with them. But animals, when they're afraid, they attack. We are not animals. We're better than that. Human beings are better than that. Americans should quit being so afraid of terror that they let our government do whatever they want. Israelis need to stop being so afraid of retaliation that they listen to people when they try to explain to them why they're being attacked. They need to understand they brought it on themselves, just like the United States brought on their terror attacks by trying to take over other countries in control.
Sue, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, I'd like to add that I don't feel as if there's been any pullback. There were specific territories. The land was divided up in 1967 war, and it's been emerging with various settlements and everything since then. There's not been a concession. Like Gaza, given that Gaza was after they destroyed the infrastructure, everything that was there. And they created a blockade so the Palestinians can't get in, they can't get out, aid can't get in, building materials can't get in and get out. And then they have an army assault on an unarmed people. The Palestinians they don't have a military. There's not a military that fights back. It's not a war. It's an assault every time that they drop white phosphorus down on the multitude of people in this populated area. It's an assault. Thus does the slapstick. And it's a shame on America that we do not act as an honest destroyer. And when we do, when we look at it, it applies. But there's no reason for all of those children to that we should be paying for that. When we look at that and we say each child is equal, let's look at the $8.5 million a day that we give to support Israel in these actions. The United States is giving them more aid. Every other country could use for this type of operations. Now, if we wanted to treat people fairly, that $8.5 million could go to repairing the damage that's already been done if it were equally divided among Palestinians and Israelis. And there's no reason not to. If you want to be an honest peace broker, the two peoples, two children, two kids, two countries, you'd have to treat them equally. You can't overwhelmingly support with military and money just annihilation of a people. That's what's happening. Just create a genocide that eliminates all Palestinians from the area. There's no discussion.
Great. Rick, you were talking about it earlier, and I think Sue just mentioned it before with America's ties to the region, and financially, supporting these. It gives off the impression, if you look deep into it, that maybe America is also supporting these sorts of actions. What I was going to ask you guys is, we talk about Israel being an apartheid state, and there are plenty of Palestinians that are able to go and work in certain Israeli cities, and they commute back and forth, although there can be difficulties with checkpoints and stuff, and we know about that. But in the end, there are Arabs and Palestinians that live inside the Israel borders. Earlier today, someone was on Vonvo, and they talked about Palestinians inside of other countries such as Syria and Lebanon, and the way they're treated is disgusting in terms of women not being able to drive, not being able to have jobs, and in the same sense that people accuse Israel of killing innocent civilians, there have been innocent civilians killed inside of Lebanon as well. And so, do you think sometimes there could be just too much hate being associated with Israel, or do you think that the Palestinian people as a whole are being hated on in that region and just by their neighbors as well?
I think it's an irrelevant question, Max, in all due respect. Moral relativism really bothers me. We're talking about the actions of Israel right now. It has nothing to do with how they're treated in Lebanon, except to the extent which the Lebanese government works in the interest of the Israeli government. But each of them has their own interests, their own cultures. We're talking about Israel here. Israel has responsibility, and Israel has responsibility for the fact there are all those refugees in Lebanon and Jordan and Syria. So there's no escaping that responsibility. You cannot say, oh, well, at least we treat them better here than we treat them there. You could say the same thing in South Africa, I suppose, if you had the Hutus in South Africa, and you say, well, at least we're not wiping them out here like the Tutsis were, or vice versa. That has nothing to do with it. The fact of the matter is that Israel has a moral responsibility toward the people that has been victimizing since its foundation, just as the United States has a moral responsibility to the people that it is victimizing throughout the Mideast and the world right now. Libya, Syria, Palestine. We all share responsibility. I'm not saying it's just Israel, but Israel's the only one that can change the situation. And they probably won't do it until people in the United States demand that they do it. Because we give them $3 billion a year. That amounts to more than half of their defense budget, if I'm not mistaken. If they had to pay for that themselves, there would be riots on the streets of Jerusalem, of Jews demanding the government do something about the economy because it's going to be in shambles without the money that we're giving them. So all it would take is United States citizens standing up and saying, That aid is going to be conditional on firm moves toward negotiation for a two-state solution. And I think if they start talking about a two-state solution, they can put one in place that would work temporarily, but ultimately, as I said, the real solution is that people need to quit looking at each other as us versus them. If they do, then you'll have a de facto one-state solution. You can't have a democracy in the Jewish-only state. It's impossible by definition. In a democracy, people have equal rights. Israel is an apartheid state, and it cannot continue to exist unless it continues to be an apartheid state and drives out people selectively based on their race or religion.
Great. Sue, do you want to follow up on that?
I guess I agree with them. I think that it's an irrelevant question how people are being treated anywhere else, especially when they're subject to the Palestine conflict, and how these people are being both the Israelis and the Palestinians. I think it's in both cases that step up and try to be an honest person, or step out, get somebody else in that would treat people the same, and all funding the same. Yeah, all children should be. We are here. We should be responsible for protecting all children. So, this is something that's we've got to be here. Something that protects all people.
Right. So I guess one thing that I'd bring up is in terms of, Israel will bring up pro-Israelis will bring up the idea of not having a peace partner in, fostering, peace amongst both Palestinians and Israelis. And we can kind of turn the subject into, we can turn the conversation more directed into like politics. In terms of a peace partner, do you think that the Israelis truly have that in certain, political parties such as Hamas and, the PLO? Do you think it's a realistic peace partner if they were actually looking to, foster peace?
Yeah, it's an interesting hypothetical question if they were looking to foster peace. In fact, Israel financed Hamas as a counterweight to PLO when PLO started gaining international respectability. And then they were very much against elections that led to Hamas gaining leadership in Gaza. And then during the recent hostilities, when a ceasefire was in place and a permanent ceasefire was being negotiated, they killed the chief negotiator. They assassinated him. So it's entirely a hypothetical question what they would do if they wanted peace, because quite clearly the leaders in Israel do not want peace. Now, would they have a partner? They would have if they hadn't have assassinated, I think his name was Jafari. They would have had someone. He was someone who was standing up and telling Hamas not to use their weapons because it was obvious what was going to happen. And some people even speculate that he was assassinated with the assistance of some people in Hamas who want to have a place in the New World Order where Israel continues to dominate the region, but they are the big fish in their little pond. I don't know if that's true or not, but the point is it's much more complicated than us versus them. And the problem starts again when you use the term now several times, pro-Israeli, as though anyone who opposes the Israeli government is anti-Israeli. I'm pro-U.S., but I am opposed to most of our international policies. I'm pro-U.S. I love the U.S. people. Obviously, I'm one of them. Everyone in my family is a U.S. people. I'm not anti-U.S. I'm anti-U.S. government policies, and I'm anti-Israeli government policies. I think the Israeli government is the biggest existential threat to Israel right now, and the people there need to wake up and realize it.
Who is this again, Rick? Who is this again? Say it one more time.
The Israeli government is the real existential threat to the state of Israel. They are isolating the nation. They're bristling with nuclear weapons and yet wanting to start a war with somebody who may or may not be developing a single bomb, and trying to drag the United States into it. Uh, Sooner or later, there's going to be some blowback, and I don't understand why it is so hard for the average Israeli citizen to understand that this cannot go on like this. They need to be standing up for justice in Palestine if they care about their own people.
Stu, do you want to follow up, or can I ask you a separate question?
Go ahead and ask me a separate question.
Yeah. So I know it hasn't happened in a few years. I mean, although right after the ceasefire occurred, there was one bus bombing. I wanted to get your opinion, both of you, on how you think Israel should handle, the idea of suicide bombings in this whole predicament if they started to occur again, because that was clearly a difficult, situation to deal with, right? And I'm sure you both would agree. How would you have dealt, with that and the potential that could arise again, for all we know?
Well, I do think it was a difficult situation and a surprising situation to deal with, because I don't think Israel, since, like you said, there hasn't been a suicide bomb in years, many years. There hasn't been that kind of force. Again, since there's not an army there, they're not fighting against the army. They're fighting against an unarmed civilian population. So I don't think it was any more difficult or alarming than, as Rick said, they killed one of the leaders of the assassination party, and one of the children to be killed, and then fired on the whole population, assaulted on the whole population. So I think, again, as long as you're occupying, you're doing it, you have to expect some resistance. That's natural. So the only thing to help the situation is to declare peace, all people equally. I don't see that it could get any worse. I can only imagine and hope that it would get much better, even if we had to get a third party and another country in to be the peace broker, since the United States are not doing a very good job. Have not done a very good job. And then Israel, all the U.S. UN might have some respect for that, so respect for international law. So anyway, it's a very difficult situation.
Rick, would you like to discuss the idea behind suicide bombings and how Israel is expected to handle that back when it was occurring more frequently, and now if it started popping up again at this critical moment?
Well, I agree with Sue that they're never going to do away with the problem as long as they continue to be an occupying power willing to use disproportionate force. That's the whole idea of asymmetrical warfare. When one power has when one entity has so much more power than the other side, the only option they leave them is what they call asymmetrical warfare, striking at smaller targets. They can't strike at the military effectively. I mean, there have been exceptions, but you can't wage much resistance that way. And I'm not justifying terrorism. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying you can expect it in these situations when you leave so few other options. I think that Sue is absolutely right. The best way to deal with it is start negotiating for peace in good faith, not lies. They've heard enough lies. Everything has been a lie. There hasn't been any serious move toward peace since Israel was founded. They have been expanding their borders. If you look into the history of the situation, 1967 was an offensive war. It was billed as a defensive war. It wasn't. It was a war of choice. And same in 1956. There's always at least two ways to look at every story, and people are only hearing one narrative, and that is narrative of the victors. There's just no other way. You can't. There's no defense against people who are determined for justice when they have absolutely no cost. Israel is interested in offering them justice. The United States claims to be the big broker. They completely side with Israel in every dispute. They're getting nothing, and they're suffering. They're losing territory all the time. If you look at maps from 1948 to now, you'll see, look at them every 10 years, you'll see the land shrinking and shrinking. In fact, Sue said earlier that they started at, that you do if they took away half of America. In fact, they took away more than half of Palestine and gave it to the Jews, despite the fact that they represented, I think it was about 40% of the population in that particular region, which is why they had to have drive out Muslims in mass numbers. And this brings up the issue of, well, you know, a lot of those people are still alive, and if they're not, their children are. And they've been growing up in refugee camps. Is there an issue here of reparations? Is there a right of return? And that's a big issue. According to international law, there is a right of return. Just to give it's not a comparable example, but after World War II, when a lot of Jewish family treasures were stolen by the Nazis, they were able to get them back or get repatriated for what was stolen, not just those people, but their children. That's international law, and it's just one of many, many examples of how Israel flouts international law. It's not enough to just say, well, we have to deal with terrorism. That's what Cheney said. That's what Bush said. We have to deal with terrorism, even if it means going into any country we want to go, invading it, slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people. You know, there are limits to what you can do to defend yourself. But the best thing to do is do what Americans have refused to do and what Israelis are refusing to do. And that is ask yourself, why are we being terrorized? And
right.
Not to mention by whom.
So Rick, you basically think that there's an underlying question, and it's very simple, of why this is all occurring. That, you know, it requires being answered on the behalf of, like, the victor, correct?
Well, I didn't say it was simple.
Okay.
It's complex, but I think it's not that hard to look at the big picture and see that we are doing things to bring this on ourselves. And when I say we, I mean people in the United States have brought on terror attacks. And probably if our government was consistently doing what it says it's doing to defend us, we would never have been the victim of a massive terror attack, which seems to have been the result of incalculable intelligence failures. But let's not get into what caused 9/11. I'm just making the point that we should have looked at that point and said, why would anybody want to do this to us?
Right.
Instead of assuming, oh my God, they're all mad, they're all crazy. Let's give our government the power to do whatever it wants to them. Oh, and hey, since they're here among us, let's let them spy on us. Let's let them take away civil liberties, because I know I'm not doing anything wrong. So that will protect me. And the Israelis need to ask themselves the same question. Why are they doing this to us? There is a good reason. Not a reason to justify it. There's an obvious reason.
Right. Okay, great. So if we could take the conversation to another interesting subject. Just yesterday I was watching a video online, and it was some very young Israeli children who were chanting hateful Arab chants. And I've seen also videos of younger children on the Palestinian end who they are being accused of being brainwashed, and they're chanting hateful Jewish chants. and I wanted to get your opinion on this matter because, and we can kind of take this into the idea of a solution. If you have this occurring, someone's not being represented properly, and someone's handing that message down to younger children, and how does something like that even and get stopped? Is it even possible to stop? Because with that happening, you can't really foresee any sort of peace with younger generations doing that. Correct?
Well, yeah, if that were the case, but I would point out though that I think that part of that is propaganda. Um, I also want to point out, but I want to preface the next statement by saying I'm not an expert on these issues. I deal with a lot of issues having to do with war and peace, not just in Israel but around the world. So I don't devote myself to studying this particular issue. I say that just in preface to point out that I rely on other experts, like the guest I had on my show today. The point he made was he has been to Israel, and he's been to Gaza and the West Bank, and he's studied these and he's talked to people in depth. And what he said, and I'm relying on his authority here, throughout Gaza there is a systematic program of education in human rights from starting up. There's no such program in Israel, and from multiple sources, there's actually more of an indoctrination of an us versus them mentality. And of course, we know that the corporate media in any developed country like Israel or the United States is going to feed the message that the ruling class wants you to have. And obviously it serves their interest to keep this conflict going, just as it for people in the United States to keep the war on terror going. So I don't think there's any equivalency between. I think that Israeli children are much more brainwashed, and even here in the United States, what do they see in the corporate media? What do they hear from their grandmothers and grandfathers who are closer to the Holocaust? That Israel is an absolute necessity for the survival of the Jewish people. And I think that's a highly debatable proposition. And I don't think the people who were reluctant to support Israel before the Holocaust, I think they'd be horrified to see what it has become. So, to get back to your question on a positive way, though, I think if we did address that systematic washing on both sides, and of course, culturally, I'm sure there are kids who grow up in families where the fathers or uncles have been slaughtered in front of them who are taught to hate Israelis. I'm sure that's true. But it isn't as systematic, I don't think. So we need to work on it on both sides. And ultimately, I think if the fear of terrorism could be reduced by having honest negotiations for peace, then cross-cultural programs could become much more common, and people could discuss this. The problem with a lot of the cross-cultural problems now is that they assume, we just don't understand each other. If we talk about it, everything will get better. That's not true. The systematic inequalities, the systematic injustices can only be addressed through a peace process that ends up making a true cultural and economic interchange between the Palestinian and the Jewish Israelis.
Okay, Sue, do you want to discuss that point?
Yes. I think that we need to put more focus on a solution than all of the, especially since most of the bidding and propaganda anyway, we never get a full version of what's happening. But I'd like to point out that even in Islam, there's a YMCA that has Muslims use in school. And that's probably projects that are create some of the and I think if workers can establish it and be responsible for or even giving the young people, not just the young people, a chance feel like those Israel and Palestine, some people want peace. They want a solution. They're tired of all this crap happening, all the lies, all the propaganda, all the war. There can't be any safety for anybody right now. No matter if you have all the might, all the might, and even if you're government, I think we have to. It's really the government. It's not me, the average person that lives in Israel and Palestine. And I don't think that it's wants to see anybody hurt in Palestine either. I mean, I do all over Palestine, all over the United States, obviously. People are there, but if we'll put our concentration on our care for other human beings, human rights, get past the brothers and sisters. And I think that's what's necessary. Let's change this dynamic. Let's get everybody that we can to go there and see on the ground for themselves what's happening. Because I know it was a life-changing experience for me. I started human rights work for Israeli for one year. I remember taking my daughter to see the Anne Frank house in Amsterdam. So totally opposed to Holocaust or so I don't want to see this kind of conflict happening, and I feel compelled to do what I can, which all I can do, I think, is to be witness to the truth, and then try to find positive solutions that benefit everybody. Let's get some other people in and oneself. It's really happening on both sides, not limit a visit to the Israeli side or vice versa. A picture. Let's present that to the world. Like the world is watching. Even with the recent UN, shows you what a minority that Israel has. So this is something Israel has to consider. It's time for a change.
Right.
We're already growing.
Great. I'd like to turn the conversation towards the solutions that can be put together here, and hear both of your opinions on what the solution is. I just thought, just hearing both of your backgrounds, I thought it'd be interesting to hear one other quick question before. What do you think the role of the media is playing in escalating? Or diminishing this conflict? And Rick, you could go first.
I could probably just defer this to Sue from her previous comments. It sounds like we're pretty much on this page. The media is owned by the powerful, and the powerful want to maintain things the way they are and keep them moving in the same direction. So they spin a tail, and that's the way it is. And everything revolves around that tail. Politicians, they get their stories together and they stick to them. We aren't getting the facts at all in the media. They're spinning a one-dimensional view of the conflict. They're constantly making false equivalencies, just as they're making false equivalencies between politicians who tell half the truth and politicians who don't ever tell the truth. Those aren't equivalent. I mean, there is, something to be said for the ones that at least tell us half the truth. The Israeli-Palestine situation, we're not hearing the truth. Neither side. There is only one side as far as that goes, because people who oppose Israeli policies, by and large, are they're just left out of the media. Although I will say that there have been some people in the media lately who have been speaking out, and to me, I always wondered who gave them permission to speak. Who decided it was a good time to leak that Hagel was being considered for a nomination for Secretary of Defense after criticizing Israel? Who made that decision? Who made the decision to tell us that they're a blind loyalty to Israeli policy? Who put Zbigniew Brzezinski on the air lashing out at the United States for being a lapdog of Netanyahu? To me, all that's kind of exciting. I mean, I can only speculate why all of a sudden we're starting to see these things in the New York Times of all places, which has always towed the line, down the line, the government line, the Israeli-American government line about what's going on in Israel-Palestine. So there are some hopeful signs, but I'm not holding my breath for the truth to come out.
Great. And Sue, do you want to? Well, quickly, Rick. Rick, I just wanted to ask you, and then Sue will get your opinion. Rick, I just wanted to ask you, and then Sue will get your opinion. When it comes to a conflict like this and others, do you think a platform like Vonvo, where Israelis and Palestinians are actually paired together and talking out these difficulties, is probably the best approach to any sort of solution?
Actually, when I checked out the first Vonvo video you showed me, I thought it was a Palestinian and an Israeli.
You're breaking up. Can you speak a little slower, Rick?
I realized it was Israelis. They were really thinking outside the box. So yes, I think it's a great idea. I love the idea of having Israelis and Palestinians and Americans, because we all have an interest in this, and we're all going to be part of the solution if it's going to happen. I honestly think, peace activists in Israel are in full danger to outspoken.
Sue, is he coming in choppy now?
Yeah.
It is dangerous activists in Israel. And regardless of whether you're Jewish or the right to free speech, it's very frightening. And if you're in the minority opinion trying to be heard and express a very unpopular view, like negotiating with Hamas, you're in physical danger. So it's important that you include Americans and show our support, tell them that we understand with them as best we can be.
Sue, do you want to follow up on the whole media idea and what Vonvo is looking to foster, if that's a better route to take towards real positive discussions and solutions?
Yes. First off, I don't have any faith in mainstream. I'm not going to be holding my breath, and for even the little crumbs that were sent of truth, there's some kind of hidden agenda behind it, I fear. And then I think it's imperative that we get as many facts as possible. So any venue that allows all of us to speak. I know that I'm not good in debate. I'm not even a public speaker. I'm passionate about this, and I passionately encourage other people to find out what they can about what's happening. And hear all opinions, all views, as much information as possible to make a difference. I think when the truth is there, that we can make a plan, make it together, and do something that would actually. Another thing, though, even in mainstream media, or I would suggest with you, is that you do, like in the old days, with the fairness doctrine, when on television somebody presented an opinion or facts opposing, or a person was able to come on and perhaps with the facts or with information. So there were ways to get both sides of the story out always, and then with respect. So one through as often as necessary to resolve it. And I'm going to go back to one of the other things you said, like you kind of intimated that possibly there wasn't a negotiating possibility as a peace partner with Hamas or with the democratically elected Hamas. They were voted, they were there, questioning whether they're a viable. But on the other hand, I have to question too. I don't think it's in their perspective. They're getting so much money from us to counterproductive. So I think we need to look at how we're monetarily financing this and look at the process that is going on. One of the things I knew was Askin, an Israeli, negotiated Yusuf Shalit. And he also was working with Jabari for a peace deal. There was a peace deal. Or he was so there possibly that peace or talk of prospects of peace. And we shouldn't eliminate anybody, especially they've been democratically elected to represent that people.
Great. So I guess we've been speaking for just over an hour. Why don't we move into what you guys believe, the solution is here? I'd be very interested to hear each of you what, solutions you propose, or at least next steps forward in resolving this conflict. Rick, do you want to go first?
Max?
Yes, do you hear me? Rick, do you hear me? Sue, do you hear Rick?
I heard him say Max, but other than that, I think it's cutting out. And what I just said pretty much sums up how I feel about it.
Wow. I thought it was just his picture that froze. Sue, can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Now we hear you. Rick, maybe if you...
There's a delay.
Yeah, it's getting a bit laggy, so...
Well, I don't know what happened to him, but I was just checking out the chat room, and it's pretty amazing the responses we were getting. Looks like Max has some interesting friends. They think we're a couple of lunatics. I hope that they didn't dismiss everything we said, because they're the kind of people that we most need to reach. I don't see how people have trouble rejecting the message you and I both had, which is that, we need to look at each other as people first. That's the message. It's, some people can't tolerate looking at themselves, I guess.
But
it looks like Max is not coming back, Sue. It was a pleasure.
Do you not hear me? Do you guys not hear me?
I hear you now.
Oh, you hear me? Rick, do you hear me?
I don't know if you heard that. Sue?
Now, there's a delay. It's what's happening. So we're speaking over that delayed speaking. I hear you now.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like the platform's fizzling right now, so I'm going to go ahead and sign off. It was a pleasure sharing the platform.
Thank you so much, Sue and Rick.
I just wanted to say it was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for your time, guys.
Okay, Matt.
Same here. Next time.
I can't hear you, so I'm going to sign off.